Here. So welcome. My name is Jessel Noor. I'm the program manager for Advancing Democracy. I see a lot of familiar faces in here. So welcome to the folks that are familiar with Advancing Democracy that we've worked with before. For the new folks, welcome as well. A little bit about Advancing Democracy. It's a program brought to you by Hearken, Trusting News, and Solutions Journalism Network, three journalism support organizations that have come together to offer these really unique training on how to strengthen your democracy reporting. And today we're kicking off the first of an ongoing series of webinars. And we're starting off with Trusting News and a training on how to build trust with your audience through mission statement. So I know some of you have done this training before, and that's okay because these trainings are full of insight and they're full of ways to strengthen the work you're already doing. And if you're not familiar with this, it'll give you the grounding you need to build a powerful mission statement and to rebuild that trust we've seen that's eroding between communities and newsrooms. And so we know this is a challenge. This has been a challenge for a long time, but especially in these days, newsrooms want to have that trust. They want their audiences to understand who they are, and this training does an excellent job of doing that. So I'm going to introduce our host today, Lynn Walsh. Is with Trusting News, where she's the assistant director. So Lynn is an Emmy award-winning journalist who's been working in investigative journalism at the national and local level across the nation, serves on the national board for the Society of Professional Journalists, among many other credentials, and has been a key partner in advancing democracy. So Lynn, good to see you. We know we haven't seen much of you recently, but it's good to have you back in the mix, and we're looking forward to your presentation.
Thanks so much. Yeah, glad to be here. Welcome. I do see some familiar faces and some new faces, so we are glad you're here. As Jessel said, I'm the assistant director at Trusting News. Joy Mayer, who founded Trusting News, is also here. She just actually got introduced herself in the chat. She's going to be monitoring the chat, putting links in. If you have questions, comments, please use that chat. We are going to stop some point a little more than halfway through, and we're going to kind of ask some questions and get some participation from all of you. So definitely be ready for that. But please introduce yourself, use that chat. We want to make this as useful as possible because what we're about to share with you, we know that this can help be something that can build trust with your community and make them look at you for this factual, useful information when it comes to government coverage and politics. So we hope that you will take this and then act on it. So we're trying to make it as actionable as possible here. A little bit more, if you're not familiar, about what we do at Trusting News. So Trusting News has been around since 2016. Our whole goal is to build trust between journalists like yourselves, people who are sharing accurate, ethical, responsible information, and the public. The reason we want to do that is because we want to make sure that as many people in communities as possible are receiving that factual, accurate, ethical information, right? That's important. Information is power. They're not going to pay attention to it if they don't trust you. So if you're producing that type of content, we want to build those relationships. And so how we do that at Trusting News is we look at research that's been done on trust, how people are relating and thinking about news, what they like, what they don't like. We come up with possible solutions. We reach out to newsrooms and we say, hey, will you try this out? Let's see how your audience responds to this. We kind of will coach them through that, see how it goes, oftentimes attaching research to it to see if it actually did work and how the public responded. We then share what we are learning more widely through things like webinars, our website. We have a weekly newsletter we'll be sharing with you, and also different kinds of kits, sheets, worksheets, everything to kind of make sure that if we know this is working to build trust, how can more journalists do it so that we have more people getting access to that accurate, ethical information? So if you have questions about that, please let us know. But I'm going to dive right in to kind of talk about and cover today one element of something that we know can help build trust when it comes to covering democracy, covering elections, covering politics. We've been working with newsrooms through Advancing Democracy for several years on doing this very thing, creating a mission statement for your election coverage, your political coverage, more broadly, your civic government coverage. And the reason this mission statement is so critical. So, one thing we know about trust in news, one, we know it is low, unfortunately, especially here in the US. We also know that oftentimes a mistrust in coverage or mistrust in news, in a newsroom, in journalists, it often can begin because someone makes an assumption. The public makes an assumption about why you did something. When it comes to politics, there are a lot of assumptions that are made. Why did you cover this candidate when they came to town, but you didn't cover this candidate when they were a state over? Why does it seem like you're covering this candidate more than another? Is it because you like them? Why are you covering this issue so much? Is it because you have an agenda or a bias or some kind of thought and you want to kind of push us in one way or another, right? So they make assumptions. They assume that we don't fact check. They make assumptions about the sources that we talk to, why we maybe left some information out because we're trying to hide something, right? These are assumptions that are made. The idea, though, here is that oftentimes those assumptions that are made are negative. They are not giving journalists and newsrooms the benefit of the doubt of the careful reporting, the fact checking, the ethical decision making, the paying attention to privacy, protecting sources. They're not giving us credit for any of that work that we are doing. A lot of times it's because they don't know about it. They don't know about how we make decisions. And so these misassumptions often happen because there's this information void, almost like misinformation. Information void is there. They try to fill it with things they're hearing, maybe from politicians, maybe from friends, from family. Again, oftentimes that information is negative, not giving us credit. So that leads to that mistrust. So one thing we know is that when users, your community, if they don't know something, they're not giving you the benefit of the doubt. Their assumptions are not going to be flattering. And so this leads to them not trusting you, journalism, the news content. So if they don't trust us, they're probably not going to consume our content. They're not going to come to us for information. So why does this matter? Well, bottom line, there's a business reason why this matters. If we want to continue to exist, we need people to consume our content. We need subscribers. We need advertising dollars, all of that. But more importantly, I think if you look at journalism as a public service, which I know I do, if they don't trust us, they're not consuming our content. What content are they consuming? Where are they going for information? This idea of news avoidance, it's real, but that does not mean information avoidance. People are still getting information. They're getting it in other ways, whether that's from social media, whether that's just from talking to family, from friends, things that they maybe see in passing, something they hear as they are walking, all these types of things, right? They're getting information still. The question is, if we are journalists that produce accurate, ethical, responsible information, it's factual, we want people to get it, and they're going elsewhere, is that information accurate? Is it ethical? Is it responsible? In some cases, it might be. But in a lot of cases, a lot of other information probably isn't based in the standards, the ethics, the responsible reporting that we have done. And so that means we now have information ecosystems in the communities where people are not acting on facts. They are acting on maybe opinions. They're acting on incorrect information. And so what does this mean for us, for society? And I know for me, I want my family, I want my friends to have access and consume that factual, accurate, responsible reporting. And so that's what we are trying to help journalists do at Trusting News. We want people to trust and go to places where there is accurate, responsible information. And unfortunately, we cannot just wish that people trust us. That has passed. We cannot just say, oh, well, they'll come back to us. I know working in television, I've heard this often. They'll start watching news once they have kids. Personally, I don't think that is something that we can rely on. I don't think that that's a reliable thing to hope for. So there are things that you can do to get busy earning trust, rebuilding that relationship so that all of the hard work you're doing, all of that accurate information reaches people where they can make a difference with it. So when we talk about this problem and, this trust problem, at Trusting News, we really do try to focus on what journalists can do. I want to also just say we definitely recognize that there are things that people, the public, can do. There are media literacy things, learning how to be a better news consumer. Yes, that can help the trust problem and getting access to accurate, reliable information. There are also things that tech companies could do to improve the situation, help us have a better information ecosystem. We cannot necessarily control those things, so we like to focus on what journalists can do. Now, today we are going to focus a lot on this element of transparency, primarily in that mission statement. What are your goals? What are your mission? But there are other things that we know can help solve this, build back trust. One thing is we as journalists need to be better at listening, and we need to be better at understanding why audiences don't trust us. What is it that we could do better? That's how we like to look at it. It's not necessarily that what we are doing maybe is wrong. It's just that, hey, if we have an opportunity to do it a little differently and do it better for our audience in a different way that's more helpful, that's more useful, why not try? That also comes down to the idea that we need some more humility in what being a journalist means and what reporting means, right? We get to decide and can decide to provide content in more respectful, more nuanced ways. So we are not adding, particularly when it comes to political coverage, to the polarizing narratives that exist. Another thing is listening. That listening, we need to continuously, and now more than ever, it is easier to listen more than ever because of technology. But I feel like maybe that also makes it harder to listen. But it is so easy to get feedback very quickly from our audiences. We should be doing this more. We should be actually asking, listening, looking at those responses, looking at what people are saying, and seeing, okay, how now should we maybe change our coverage to maybe make it a little bit better? To basically show up and reflect what our audiences are curious about and what their priorities are. So at Trusting News, this is kind of all the different things we focus on and help journalists do. We know based on different research that we've done that these elements of listening, acting on what you are hearing, having humility, having more nuanced coverage, being more respectful with coverage, that can help build trust. We also know transparency does. And so that's what today we're going to focus on is by being transparent about your mission, that will help clear up misassumptions about journalism more broadly, but specifically about you, about what you do as a journalist, as a news organization that sets you apart. What are your standards? How do you fact check? What are your promises about being fair, about not just airing content, without making sure it's accurate, right? So explaining the ethics, integrity, ideally proactively is what this mission statement will do instead of reactively. So you already have it out there. So if you need to react, you can. But the idea is by getting it out there ahead of time, you're breaking through that information hole. You're filling it with what you provide, the content, the accuracy, the ethics, the integrity, all of that. And so another reason why this matters is this also is a way for you to differentiate yourself from all the other content that is out there. If you are someone who does try really hard to be accurate, to be fair, to add context, to show impact, right, of how and connect the dots for people, we need to say that. There's a lot of people sharing information, committing acts of journalism out there that are not abiding and or paying any attention to that. People care about those things. It may not seem like it sometimes, but people do. They don't want to be fed lies. They don't want to be fed misinformation. They want to know real facts. So if we are doing that, let's share that, let's say that, and let's use that actually as a way to differentiate ourselves from all the other content that's out there. Another reason why this matters is because not all journalism is good. The media is very broad group of people, of individuals, of businesses, of content, right? And so we also should be willing to say, some of the stuff out there, it's not good. And I can actually see why. you are making this assumption about my work because we do see it out there. We do see people who have agendas that are acting as news organizations or that are acting as journalists and saying that they are unbiased and they're not. Saying that, admitting to that, and showing how you are trying to be different can be a huge opportunity to rebuild trust and differentiate yourself and tell your own story. While this mission statement that we're going to go over is going to be particular to your political coverage, your government coverage, it's important to know that while you're doing this, while you may be talking about, here's how we plan to cover this election, here's how we plan to cover this candidate, here's our promise to you about what sources we are using and how we verify facts. While you may be talking about very specific things within politics, this also, though, goes much more broadly to talk about your story, why people should invest in you, feel a connection to you, why they should trust your team. The thing is no one else is going to do this for you. As much as maybe we wish we had sort of large PR companies behind us telling everyone how great journalism is, and in some news organizations do have that, but for the most part, we don't have that as an industry. There isn't really a lot of these messages that are, if they are being shared, they're not getting through to people. So we have to take it upon ourselves if we want people to read the important work and listen or view the important work that we're producing. When we talk about talking about telling your own story, what differentiates yourself, getting on the record about mission, about ethics, about how you fact check, all of these things, this is needed on two levels. And so how we look at it at Trusting News is there's the institutional level. Maybe on your website, you have your commitment to accuracy. You have an About Me page. It might have an ethics policy, might have information about who your team is. It might have information about how to make a correction. It might have information about how to just get in touch with you with a question, a story tip, all those things, right? So that is great. The problem is people necessarily aren't just hanging out on those pages. They are if they maybe have a problem or if they have a question, right? And we want to make sure those pages are findable. I actually was just trying to find staff bios of a news organization the other day, and when I just went to their webpage in their drop-down menus, couldn't find it. Now I Googled it, the page popped right up, but still not super helpful. I'm already on their website trying to find out who's on their team, who their reporters are, and couldn't do it. So we want to make sure that it's good to have that stuff institutionally, as we like to say, somewhere where people can find. Make sure it's findable. Actually, a good exercise would be to have a friend or family, or even you do this yourself. Like, can you find out if your ethics policies, do you have anything about how to get in touch about a correction for your news organization? See if you can find that. How easy, how hard. That's good. The problem, though, is again, people aren't going to those pages. So we need to get those messages into the day-to-day coverage. The idea is if someone has a question or has an assumption about why you're covering a particular story, we don't want them to make that negative assumption, right? So we need to fill that question, answer that question when they have it. And that means it's going to be when they see that headline, when they're reading the story, when they're watching your story, when they're consuming your content. So that's why these messages, institutional, great, but then getting it into the day-to-day. We're going to talk a lot about how institutional, that's creating that mission statement, is step one, and then getting it into that day-to-day coverage, which we have a few examples of as well. So when we talk about a mission statement, these can take several different forms. But primarily, things that a good mission statement should include is the why, the reason you do what you do, how you are going to conduct your work in that way, and then what, the actual thing that you do. What's really important is we're talking about mission statements. These should be things that are not filled with buzzwords, jargon about the industry, throwing around kind of all of these things that we like to talk about that we do in journalism: accountable, investigate, hold people to power. Those things are great, but what does that mean? If someone was reading it, could they actually say, oh, okay, I understand what that means in my community, or I understand what stories they would cover. So when you're talking about this, and in some of these examples, I will point some of this out. We want to use language that is direct, to the point, and easy to understand for non-journalists, non-politicians, non-political people, right? We want to make sure that your mom can understand. We want to make sure that people who maybe have never voted understand, right? So when you're doing this, think about the public. You're writing this for the public, not for yourselves, not for your manager, not for the next job you may have, anything like that. It's for the public. How can you explain what you do, how you do it, and what that looks like for the public? The other reason to have a mission statement, we talked about how they can show you how values, ethics, goals. But a couple other things that we find, and we have found throughout the years working with newsrooms, is they can hold your newsroom accountable. This can make people a little bit nervous. I know when I've worked with newsrooms, they are sometimes afraid or nervous, or their legal department gets them kind of worried or tells them, no, you can't say that, to go on the record about how you do your job. Well, I guess my approach and what I say to that is, one, we hold other people accountable. Actually, holding ourselves accountable is a part of a lot of ethics codes. I know it's a part of the Society of Professional Journalists ethics codes. The idea is, if we hold others accountable, I really do believe we should be held accountable. What better way to be held accountable than by getting on the record? The other thing, though, is that we know that by sharing this information, it lets people in on the process and can, again, interrupt that those misassumptions from happening. Another kind of two other great things it does, if you have some of this information about how you fact check, how you cover a political candidate, it helps the whole newsroom respond to comments. So sometimes maybe a younger reporter, a newer reporter, someone not in management is like, gets a question or an accusation. Oh my gosh, you didn't fact check any of this, and you are totally biased toward this one candidate. And maybe they want to respond and say, like, and share a little bit about their reporting process. No, like, here are the things I did. Some people might be nervous to be that transparent. Like, am I allowed to share this? Am I allowed to talk about the conversation I had with my editor? Like, I don't know. Like, I don't want to open myself up to like litigation or something, right? So what we have found is that when newsrooms have this type of information public facing already, it makes it easier and more comfortable for more people in the newsroom to have confidence in responding. They don't have that worry because it's already public. They can copy and paste language. They can link to, send a link to what's already been published. Another thing it does is it can keep your coverage consistent and tied to goals. There is so much to cover out there. With newsrooms shrinking and having less people to cover what's going on in communities, if we say, here's our focus, and we have 20 stories to pick from, kind of coming back to these mission statements can help us basically pick stories to cover in a way that is sticking to our goals and our mission and consistent. Oftentimes, another reason that distrust can show up is that people see inconsistencies. Well, you covered this candidate when they came to town. Why didn't you cover this candidate? Or kind of more broadly, you covered this high school all the time with their sports and not this high school, right? There are all these kinds of things. People see differences, they make an assumption. Most of the time, that assumption is going to be negative or think that you have an agenda for or against something, or you're playing favoritism. If you keep your coverage consistent, that's less likely to happen. You can point to reasons why you did X, why you did Y, why you covered this candidate, why you didn't cover this candidate. So what do these look like? Well, we have a lot of examples, and we are very grateful to the many newsrooms, some of which are here, who have worked with us to create mission statements around their election coverage. This is from an election FAQ from the capital B. They answer the question basically, whose stories do you want to tell? And they're very honest, upfront, and open that they are telling stories, striving to report stories that reflect the diversity and richness of Black communities, from rural voters in Alabama to young professionals in Chicago. This is important because they're saying this is the type of coverage we do. And so for this news organization, they do have kind of a very specific focus, right, on a particular audience. Get on the record about that, because if people aren't familiar with that, they may assume, why am I not seeing stories about these type of people? And it's always someone who fits into this demographic. Well, that's purposeful in this case, right? So explain that. Weil filed during the 2022 election did what I think is a great approach to kind of having a mission statement. So sometimes this might feel overwhelming. Like, where do I start? And I know when I've coached newsrooms on this, I say, okay, what are things you're going to do when it comes to this election coverage? Like, if I'm a viewer, if I'm a user, if I'm a reader in your area, what will I see from your coverage? Excuse me. And that's exactly what this does. It's basically just bulleted answers to that question. What are we going to do in this coverage? And I also like that when it's in the bulleted form, I think it makes it more accessible and easier to read. Sometimes when things are written as a letter from the editor, the points can get lost. This is very upfront, very direct, and kind of just explains it all. So they're saying we will cover forums and debates. We're going to publish profiles of candidates. We're going to investigate big campaign donors. We are going to, and this is when President Trump was in office, or former president, sorry, they're going to gauge former President Trump's influence on the elections. Because if we remember, that was happening. They're going to answer readers' questions. So again, this is what we are going to do. And I also love how they link to give examples of like what this can look like and what are some like stories that you may see. Now, on the flip side, what you could also answer is, here's what we will not do. Are there certain races that you're not able to cover? In some cities where you have so much ground to cover, I know in Cincinnati, Ohio, when they're covering elections, they have 3 states to cover, 2 major big cities that exist there. That's it's a lot of races, a lot of things going on. If you can't cover it all, get on the record about that. I also really love this example because talk about clear, direct language. This last line here, they're basically saying, this is what is going on with this midterm election, right? But they say, for our part of Central Virginia, that means we can decide if Rep. Bob Good will serve another term or if we will hire someone else for the job. This sounds silly. I guess people realize that someone would lose a job, not lose a job, but I just love the clear, plain, inviting language too. It's like you get to decide if who we're going to hire. I don't know, putting it that way to me kind of really resonates with this idea of making voting seem impactful and more accessible. This is a mission statement from Charlottesville tomorrow, or that's the one that I just showed, sorry. And that was kind of a closer up view of that. This is an example here, again, the election, the 2022 midterms. What I love about this is they call out this idea of independent news. So people probably tell you this, almost everyone says, as they write here, they want independent news. It's hard to imagine someone actually saying that they want biased news coverage, right? But what does independent mean? So they go on to basically explain at the Nevada Independent, here's what independent means to us. They say it means that we are dedicated to diving deep into the most important state policy issues and providing a clear, easy to comprehend, while still substantive treatment of major issues. That's everything. And then now they give examples, right, of what that looks like. That's everything from explaining how the state government operates and why certain major decisions at the state legislature are made, giving necessary context around the latest outrage in the school district, and providing a sober look at the future of water in southern Nevada. So they kind of describe in one sentence what they're aiming to do. They give solid examples of what that looks like by linking to coverage that they have done. So again, you're making it clear, this is what this looks like in our coverage. This is another mission statement from New Hampshire Latino News. And they talk about how they're dedicated to building trust with the audience in their election coverage through collaboration, inclusion, and transparency. What does that mean? So I think this kind of language that you see, this like kind of lofty goals, right? And we're using maybe buzzwords, but then they go on and they don't just leave it there. They explain they're going to achieve that collaboration, that inclusion, that transparency by doing the following. Again, using bulleted form, which I think can be really effective for people who are looking for quick answers. But this idea that they will do this by not making assumptions about what communities need to know. They're going to commit to genuinely listening to them through surveys and in person and virtual events. They're going to partner with organizations to help us increase accessibility to the public, broaden the reach. And they say that our reporting will not just revolve around the candidates or one day, like election day, but rather a year round focus on the work of policymaking. So, this larger government focus, it's not just on the horse race. They're committing to doing more than that to cover this issue more broadly. So those are what some common mission statements look like. They're answering basic questions, as you can see, about like what types of stories they may cover, what their goals are. But you also, kind of beyond the mission statement, can talk about, and I mentioned this, are there stories, situations you won't cover? I think that's a great way to get started. Again, here's what we will cover, here's what we won't cover. Maybe get really specific. How will you cover candidates? Maybe, again, if you have so many candidates, so many races, you can't cover all of them. I know this happens a lot of times in cities. You have so many people on the ballot. How do you decide who to focus your coverage on? We do this internally. If you've ever been in charge of setting up your election coverage, you're part of these conversations. You're part of this decision making. We're only deciding to cover candidates who are polling at X amount, only those who have 10% of voter support or more. That's the only thing we can do. Well, if someone likes one of those candidates that has 8% and they don't see you covering them a lot, or they just see their name listed and no stories about them, they're going to think you don't like them. You don't want them to win. But actually, no, it's been a conscious decision not to because of resources. Explain that. Another thing is, how will you report on election results? How do election results work? How are we making sure people understand that process? And how do you work to be fair, which I have some examples of that. But the idea is, first and foremost, a mission statement can continue to be added to. And one way to do that is by creating an FAQ. So instead of just having the mission statement that has a couple paragraphs, if you want to go beyond that, answer more questions. And again, I feel like the questions you could answer are like endless. And that's why this can be a living document. It can be updated as coverage goes on. It can be updated over the years, right? Putting this information into an FAQ makes that a lot easier. And so a couple examples of what that looks like. This is an example from WITF, radio station in Pennsylvania. And they basically have just listed a question and here's an answer. Listed a question, here's an answer, right? I love when FAQs are, if your CMS, your website allows it to be in something that is expandable and collapsible. I think that's helpful from just the user experience, or if you can find other ways to kind of link to coverage or relink back to the questions. But they're answering questions like, how do you report on public opinion polls? That's probably not something that needs to be in kind of a broad mission statement, but probably something people have questions about. So again, you can kind of add that. You see that this might be something that people have questions about. Will you use labels like far right, far left? WITF really kind of has dug in and kind of gotten on the record about different style issues, word choices, and it's really been helpful to be consistent with their coverage and set the record straight about this. Isn't about you see where we stand. So people aren't making an assumption. They're telling you what their goals are and why they're using certain language. This is from Colorado Public Radio, and they also have a really good FAQ. So in this case, these are, and again, talking a little bit about how it's laid out on the website. At the end of the day, anything is better than nothing. But if you have the ability to kind of think about the user experience of how clicking on this and navigating this will work, it's worth it, I think. So these are expandable and collapsible boxes. Another way to do it, you list them, you hyperlink so that when someone clicks on it, it's bringing you right to that section of where the FAQ is. Some of the questions that Colorado Public Radio decided to cover was that they talk about their mission, particularly a line here. They say, our mission is to serve all Coloradoans, not a partisan sliver. As the election approaches, we wanted to explain more thoroughly what we're doing to earn your trust every day. They talk about source selection. So they talk about how reporters are always expanding their source databases. They look for sources who are experts. We look for sources across a wide range of attributes, race, ethnicity, geography, ideology. The most important consideration, though, for a source is their importance to explaining an issue. They also talk about on deciding what to cover. One of the biggest areas where people have questions and or make an assumption about your goals is story selection. How do you decide what stories to cover and what not? Your mission statement can help guide that, but I think it's also good to just answer the question. And so that's what they did on deciding what to cover. These are things they consider. They ask questions. Does this affect actual people? How and how many? Does this help Coloradoans understand each other? So these are things that keep them focused on what stories to select and keep them consistent. They also answer on a balance of coverage between political parties. They say, broadly speaking, we don't have a running count to make sure we broadcast X number of Republicans, X number of Democrats. But with each and every story, reporters and editors ask each other, have we presented the issue fairly? And they say if we have missed a perspective, we look to find that before you read or hear the story. One more FAQ example, and then we're gonna just pause to have you answer a question, because hopefully this has inspired you to think of something that you definitely want to answer for your audience. This is from the Texas Tribune. Again, what can you expect from our election coverage? They have this little box. Now, when you click on it, it brings you down to the section. It also has this little link. What's great about that is that it can link back to that particular section. So again, we talked about getting this content into day-to-day coverage. All of these FAQs are great, and I have more examples of this, but by creating it this way, you can link directly to that explanation in your daily stories, which is really helpful to get people's attention when they have it. And one other way to kind of group this content is to create a page dedicated to a particular race or a particular election. The Atlanta Journal-Constitution did this a couple years ago with the mayoral race, and they answered questions about how they're going to cover the race, their commitment to you. They have a photo of their reporters. They also had a section, which I really loved, that talked about what can a mayor actually do? Like basically they explained what the position of mayor is, does, what they have control over, what they don't. Again, a really simple way to provide that on-ramp to getting people who maybe don't understand politics, aren't involved in politics, to vote and feel more that it's accessible for them. So I want to pause because you saw all those examples. You saw the questions that people answered, that newsrooms answered. So what's one question? And again, we want to make this actionable. We hope all of you are here to duplicate and go create a mission statement or an FAQ around your political coverage. What is one question you would answer right now for your audience about your election coverage, about your political coverage? And Joy's going to be put the answer in the chat. And Joy is going to be monitoring that and kind of sharing some of what ideas that are bubbling up.
So it can be something, just reinforcing something that you saw in one of Lynn's examples, what feels especially important. It could be something that wasn't touched on here, but that you are hearing a lot. It could be something that's really vexing for your newsroom. My job would be a lot easier if people understood this about me. Mm-hmm. Anyone up for sharing in the chat?
No, not very many.
I guess not. I'm not seeing it.
Okay.
I'm not seeing any yet. So
that's okay. Well, maybe they'll come to you. We have a couple more examples. And so this is actually perfect because if you're having a trouble thinking about this, one way to find out what to write about, what to include, is to think about what questions does your audience have about your journalism, right? So if that was something hard for you to think about, or you're just not sure what that looks like, one of the biggest things you can do is ask your audience. What do they not understand about your political coverage? What questions do they have about how you report on politics? What do they want to know more about? What are they mad about your political coverage? What are they upset about? What do they wish they saw more of, less of, right? Ask them. So this is an example from the Texas Tribune, and they basically ask, tell us, let us know, what issues do you most care about going into this election cycle? What questions do you have about voting? What's missing? How does this align with what you've seen in our coverage, right? If you have a mission statement, if you have a page about your coverage, your goals, you could put something like this on the bottom of it. You could share this at the bottom of every political story. You could say, our goal with our political coverage is to do XYZ. How are we doing? Let us know. What else do you want to know? Another strategy, instead of just asking, but you can keep track of what you wish people knew by turning these assumptions into information gaps. So again, often I talked about, and we like to give people the benefit of the doubt, that they are assuming something because they don't know something. So something you can look at if you don't want to just ask is, what kind of negative comments are you receiving? Maybe it's out in the field when you're reporting. Maybe it's comments on your story. And again, a lot of times these aren't going to come up as questions. These are going to come up as an accusation about your coverage, that you didn't talk to enough people. It was one-sided. You have an agenda, right? We look at that as an opportunity to turn that into a question to answer. So, an example here, you cover this candidate more because you want her to win. I'm sure if any of you have covered politics, you have heard a version of this one way or another. Well, a question you could answer out of that is, how do journalists, how does your newsroom decide which races and candidates to focus coverage on? Answers to this question could depend on resources, location, vicinity of where people are. Again, I gave that example of, we are only covering people who are polling at this level because that's what we have the capacity to do, right? When it comes to issues, are you only focusing on a particular set of issues and you can't focus on everything? But that complaint, if you answer that question in an FAQ, mission statement, get on the record about it, it can help people not make that misassumption that is negative about you having this agenda or a favoritism towards one candidate.
Hey, Lynn, I'm going to jump in and say,
Yeah.
Tracy put a really good one in the chat about being a member station and all the misassumptions, just how little people understand about what of the content you're sharing you actually control, what is created by your newsroom, and what you're running from elsewhere. This could be, it could be NPR content. It could be, we hear a lot about AP content and just other sort of wire or syndicated content. So a great opportunity to treat that misassumption about what you control and turn it into an explanation.
Yes, that is definitely, I feel like every newsroom is running some content that they don't have control over. Now, the one thing to point out is, if you don't have control over it, you do potentially, and in a lot of cases, have control over whether or not to run it. Sometimes you don't, and I think that should be explained. But people are going to associate pretty much anything that you publish with you. They don't understand that that's the AP and this is your local news station, right? So talk about how you think about what stories you choose, why you are providing that, right? The reason most people provide wire content in any sort of way is so that they can give more content on more topics that they can't report on individually. So you're trying to help out your audience, and I think that's important to point out. One question that people do get, and I don't know if this popped up in the chat, but how do you work to be fair? And we have had some newsrooms explain this really well. So just a couple examples here, and then we'll end and see if there are any just kind of questions or comments. But this idea that we do try to be fair, and here's how we do it, and how PolitiFact approaches this, and how they're very transparent, is they say we don't try to make either party or any particular politician look bad or look good. I think this is so important because a lot of people do assume that we like to make people look bad, or we're trying to make people look good, because we cover a story that may make someone they like be shown in a negative light, it's like, oh, well, all you do is make people look bad. And it's like, no, that's actually not our goal. And so that's what PolitiFact goes on to say is we fact check to inform readers. We work hard to hold everyone accountable. They then say we do tend to fact check provocative statements that sound wrong. So if some people get fact checked more, that might be why. And I love that little explanation. The Tucson Sentinel gets on the record and says at the Sentinel, we're nonpartisan. We don't endorse candidates or take sides on ballot measures. We don't have corporate overlords thousands of miles away dictating our coverage. We're transparent about who funds us, people in this community, just like you. We live here and we're affected by the outcomes of elections, just like you as well. How are we human? We are here. We send our kids to the same schools. We use the same roads, the same grocery stores, all of these things. How can you make sure that people understand that you're a part of the community and your goal is to try to improve it and hopefully make it a better place for everyone? Another example of a question, does your publication support one candidate or another? I feel like newspapers probably get this quite often, especially when endorsements come out, right? What does that mean? So one, in this case, they don't endorse candidates for office and they try to be fair when we cover everyone. So that's good to get on the record. That's a differentiation. That's different than a lot of news organizations. If you are endorsing candidates, how does that impact news coverage? What's that separation? People don't understand that. So how can we get on the record about that and explain that? This is from the USA Today network, the Ohio Bureau. They specifically, one, talk about what is the Ohio Bureau of USA Today. They also, though, say, they answer this question, why do you focus more on Republicans than Democrats in state news coverage? We've had a couple newsrooms answer questions like this because, and this reason makes sense, but people don't think this through, right? Or kind of this isn't something that comes top of mind. In Ohio at the time when they wrote this, Republicans control the legislature as well as the governor's mansion and other statewide offices. That means they often drive key decisions in Ohio. It's our responsibility to examine the action of leaders in both parties and hold them accountable. But you'll see more stories about GOP leadership because of the power they wield in state government. So again, people may make the assumption you're picking on Republicans. Well, we're covering them more because it's more likely things that they're doing will actually become law and become something that could impact all of you. Really small question that I think can go a long way. So what's most important is we gave you these examples, mission statements, lots of different ways to do it, FAQ pages, lots of different ways to do it, lots of questions to answer. But what's most important is you do need to pick a way to get on the record that works for your team. Because if it doesn't work for your team, it's not going to be something that resonates, that's true, that they're going to want to share and talk about. And so also something to think about is that accountability aspect. Once this content goes live, you will be held accountable. Again, I know that that might be scary, but I think we should welcome it and we should actually see it this as an opportunity to explain our goals. We can use links to this, sections of it when responding, when making statements, answering questions. We can also then provide this content on social and other products, newsletters, that type of thing. Inside the newsroom, we should be working to kind of make sure our whole newsroom understands these policies, involve the entire newsroom in the process to make sure that we are all being consistent in that coverage. And we want to make sure to get these examples into daily coverage. So how can that get into online coverage, on air, in print? Newsletters can be a great way. Social media, comments, again, responding to people when they have questions or complaints, responding to one-on-one emails, calls. Anywhere your audience is consuming the content is where we want to get it. So just a couple examples of how you can do this. You can take elements of your mission statement, an explanation about how you cover candidates, maybe put it in a little box on the website, maybe put it as an editor's note, right? And this can be inserted into that daily coverage over and over and over again. And just another example, another mission statement, this is WUCF and in Florida, again, you could put this box on every political story. In this case, I would also link maybe to a broader page that has this information, but the point is get these messages, get this information into that daily content. So if you want more help with this, Trusting News, we have created all of these kits. We call them trust kits, where we take all of our kind of best information about a topic and try to walk you through how you could do this. So we have one on how to cover elections. There's a section on it about mission statements. And we also have our weekly newsletter called Trust Tips, where we like to share actionable, quick tips on how you can build trust. And it comes out every Tuesday. So that is all that I have. I will stop sharing. There's about 6 minutes left. Anyone has questions, we're glad to take it. And I don't know, Jessel or Joy, if you also have any closing comments.
Thanks so much, Lynn. That was, yeah, we saw in the chat, a lot of people found that helpful. I've seen this, I've like gone through this training a bunch of times, and I'm always picking up new things to share with the newsrooms that I work with. But yeah, we have a few minutes. So if folks have questions or comments, saw Sherry found this incredibly helpful. Oh, but she has to run, but that's great. We can, Sherry, if you're watching the recording after you've left, please follow up and let us know. That was helpful. And as I mentioned in the chat, we'll be sending out the recording, the deck, all the resources mentioned in the follow-up email, which we'll send out soon after the recording is over. And as I mentioned in the beginning, this is just the first of a series of webinars we'll be having throughout the year, bringing you trainings and resources such as this one, and also in engagement and solutions journalism, along with good conflict in the next few months. But we have a few minutes left for questions. So if folks have questions, or if Joy, if you had any final thoughts, please.
Nope, I don't, but thank you. Yeah, feel free to hop, but we'll hang out in case folks have questions. Thanks so much.
Yeah, and
Yeah, and
thanks
if
for
you
those that are
do,
saying it's
yeah.
helpful. I was just going to say, like, yeah, definitely. If you end up doing this, please send us a link. We'd love to see it. Maybe include you in another example or presentation. It's always great to get shout outs. So I hope you are inspired and it leads to action. Again, you can keep it simple. What will we do? What will we not do? Start there. Maybe that's like a basic thing you could do. Okay. Well, thank you, everyone. Really appreciate it. And go create those mission statements.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, Jessel.
Bye. Bye, Jessel. Bye, Joy.